evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to Bible study at Lee Memorial. Tonight we are going to go over Genesis chapters 41 and 42. These are quite lengthy chapters, so we're going to try to move through them as efficiently as possible. So let's just go ahead and get started. So we see that when chapter 41 opens, it's subtitled Joseph's Dreams. Joseph was imprisoned. So he was in prison with a baker and a cupbearer, both of which had dreams in the previous chapter, both of those dreams which Joseph had interpreted. And Joseph asked the cupbearer when he was released from prison, when Pharaoh's anger had kind of calmed down a little bit, he asked the cupbearer to remember him. So we see 2 years have gone by since that passed. So verse 1 of chapter 41 says, when 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile when out of the river came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up to the Nile and stood beside those on the riverbank. And the cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. So then it says that Pharaoh fell back to sleep in verse 5 and had a second dream. So instead of this time with cows, this time there were 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, and they were growing on a single stalk. And after them, 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy, full heads. Then Pharaoh woke up. It had been a dream. So we see that Pharaoh is laying in bed. He has these 2 dreams back to back. And these dreams, we can assume just by the way that the writer puts it, that Pharaoh woke up, it had been a dream, that these dreams were vivid. And if you know any dreamers, or if you are a dreamer yourself, you know that there are certain types of dreams that you not only remember, but you know they're significant. There's some kind of importance behind them. So Pharaoh realized that this was one of those dreams. So in the morning, his mind was troubled. If you're a dreamer, you know that when you wake up after a dream like that, you know, things kind of feel a little weird. It feels a little off. There's like a foreboding and dark feeling in the air. So it says, in the morning, his mind was troubled. So he sent for the magicians and wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dream, but no one could interpret them for him. So in these times, magicians were the go-to people for all things wise counsel. Their job was to look into the different arts, the different sciences. They were astronomers, astrologers, all of that good stuff. But they also interpreted dreams. Now, mind you, if you remember back in chapter 40, when the cupbearer and the baker approached Joseph told them, I can't interpret your dreams, but God can. That's God's job to do that. So Pharaoh's looking around, looking throughout his people, throughout his men, his magicians, to find someone to interpret this dream. So then it says in verse 9, then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, Today, 2 years later, today, I am reminded of my shortcomings. So Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now, verse 12 says, now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his own dream. And when things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us, I was restored to my position, and the other man was impaled. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. So Joseph had spent a total of 12 years in prison. He was in prison for, as we know, something that he didn't do, in a land that he really shouldn't have been in the first place. Like, things are just kind of spiraling out of control for Joseph. He's been in a couple of rough patches, for no fault of his own. But we see here with this verse that things are about to change around. And the thing about it, when God changes things around, as we can see here and as we've seen in other situations, it's instantaneous. So Joseph in the prison all of a sudden went from somebody, just a lowly prisoner, or, who had some rank as far as prisoners go, but he turned into somebody who could possibly interpret a dream for Pharaoh. So his name had entered into a place that he hadn't stepped foot yet, but because he was faithful, that reputation preceded him. So then the Bible says in verse 14, so he had sent for Joseph, and when he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. So verse 15 says that Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it, but I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. So then Joseph responds, I cannot do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer that he's desired. So Pharaoh obviously is going off of the report of the cupbearer. Pharaoh is, asked Joseph if he can interpret the dream. And if this were anybody who were less honorable, that response, instead of, it's not me who does it, it's God who does it, would be, yes, I can. I can do that. That's something that I can do for you. When the fact of the matter is, it wasn't that Joseph was, gifted with dream interpretation. I mean, well, actually he was. But it wasn't a gift that's something that he could learn on his own. That's a God-given gift. That's something that's particularly chosen and given to certain people because it's needed eventually. That's something that only God can do. Only God can do that. And there are other gifts that we all share in different kinds of gifts, and those kinds of gifts are things that only God can do. So Joseph was put in a place where he could have said, this is something that I could do for you. But he said, let me redirect your thinking to the God that I serve. Let me redirect your thinking. I may be the one to verbally give you this, but I have a God who's given me this gift. I have a God who's given me these visions. I have a God who helps me to interpret these things. And we see from there, because if you remember when Joseph had the dream about his brothers, his response wasn't that humble. It wasn't that, that succinct, and it wasn't always pointing to God. But Joseph had spent this time in this prison for 12 years for something he didn't do, and he turned from, a child that kind of, it was a little egotistical if you kind of look at the profile of Joseph, and he turned into a wise man in the prison, while he was in the prison. And I'm sure in those 12 years, as we all would be, that he was upset. He had some hard times. He felt like God wasn't moving fast enough on his behalf. He was doing, and he probably had his doubts. But fact of the matter is, when God comes in and when God makes these moves, they're fast, they're thorough, and they blow away any other expectation. So it says, I can't do it. God will be the one to do it. And verse 17 says, and Pharaoh said to Joseph, in my dream, I was standing on the bank of the Nile. When out of the river there came up 7 cows, fat and sleek, and they grazed among the reeds. After them 7 other cows came up, scrawny and very ugly and lean. I had never seen such ugly cows in all the land of Egypt. The lean, ugly cows came up to eat the 7 fat cows that came up first. But even after they ate them, no one could tell what they had done, that they had done so, because they looked just as ugly as before. Then I woke up. Then the second dream comes about here, and it says, in my dream, I saw 7 heads of grain, full and good, growing on a single stalk. After them 7 other heads sprouted, withered and thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 good heads, I told this to the magicians, and none of them could explain this to me. So Joseph goes on to interpret the dream. So we see that there's a couple more details that come out when Pharaoh retells it. In the first portion of it, he doesn't really say that there were no uglier cows in Egypt. He doesn't really say that when the ugly cows overtook the nice sleek cows that they didn't gain any weight. But he got these details, let Joseph know them, and then Joseph starts to interpret that dream. Okay, I see what you've given me. Now let me tell you what it means. So then verse 25 says, then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. It is one and the same dream. The seven lean, ugly cows that came up afterwards are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless heads of grain, just as I said, they are 7 years of famine. So Joseph lets Pharaoh know, hey, listen, famine is coming to the land. So then verse 28 says, it is just as I said to Pharaoh, God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. So there will be 7 years of abundance where everything is going well, there's surplus, there's lots of food in the land, there's lots to eat from. Everything will be just great. It'll be a good time. Their economy will grow and all of these great things. But then here will come 7 years of famine. Now let me tell you about God's mercy. See, the thing is, God could have just had the 7 years of abundance, had the 7 years of famine without any message to anyone. But God gave Pharaoh this dream. And God put Joseph in a position to interpret at a key time. See, without that kind of interpretation, there was no way that Egypt or even the land surrounding, as we see later on in the text, could have survived. So then the Bible goes on to say, on verse 31, the abundance in the land will not be remembered because the famine that follows it will be so severe. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms and that matter has been is because that matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. So not only is Joseph saying that there will be a famine, or there will be abundance and then there will be famine eventually, he's saying soon and very soon. You know, you need to start thinking about these things, that there's going to come a time very soon where you need to start preparing your people, start preparing your land, start preparing your crops. And then so Joseph saw the confirming hand of God in the repetition of the dreams. So later on in the Bible, we know that when 2 or 3 are gathered together, we know in Deuteronomy, I can't recall the verse right now, but it talks about how, you know, when there are 2 or 3 people, that's confirmation that something's going to happen. So he confirmed that this was going to happen there, you know, and he said that the matter was definitely decided by God. So when I read this part, this is something that actually stuck out to me because it made me realize that there are some things that no amount of praying away, no amount of fasting away, there's no amount of any action that we could do or anything that we could do that can change some things that God has put in our lives. The matter's been decided in some places. There are some things that God has decided it's so, but it's key to what's coming next. There are some things, when they happen, it's not our job to ask why. It's our job to know that God is faithful. It's our job to know that God is still God, even in those those years of abundance, even in those years of famine. God is still faithful, and God is still God. And then it also struck out to me that Joseph knew and had no shame and relaying the message that the matter was absolutely and entirely in the hands of God. See, God had a purpose for this dream and for the timing of Joseph going to jail and Joseph being sold into slavery. He knew that the very existence of the Israelite people would be in the hands of Joseph, pretty much interpreting this one dream. So we move on. Verse 33 says, "And now let Pharaoh look for," and then he gives the qualifications for what would be the best kind of person to put at the head during these times that are about to come. So it says, "Let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man." A discerning and wise man. And put him in charge of the land. Sometimes we want to be put in charge, but we operate in a way that is neither discerning or wise. Sometimes we don't know how to use the tools that God has given us. We kind of fail to make the best of what we've got. We don't, and then when it comes to discernment, we just let anybody do anything to us, and we just let everybody treat us any kind of way, and we just put our effort and our time into things that don't deserve it. If we had used even an inkling of discernment, if we had used even an inkling of just, a little common sense, observed a little while longer, we would see that, there are things that we can't trust in everybody's hands. We don't run Egypt, none of us are over anything that's, that grand in scale, but we can't even be trusted with our own households. We can't be trusted to be discerning and wise in our own personal lives. We can't be discerning and wise in our own prayer life sometimes. But we see here that that's what it calls for. In times where things are kind of up and down, it takes discernment and wisdom to make sure that you can make it through or survive through that. So we see here, so Pharaoh will look for a discerning and wise man, put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take a fifth of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. So typically there was a tax that was about 10% on the land. Joseph is saying double that tax because we are going to be in abundance. Let's take 20% of it. Let's store it up. This is a good steward. This is somebody who knows how to budget. And Joseph is making really good points here for the key survival of Egypt and Israel as a whole. So then it says, they should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh. Then it says, of these good years that are coming, to be kept in the cities for food. And then verse 36 says, this food should be held in reserve for the country, to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by famine. So what's happening is Joseph is saying, let's start a rainy day fund. Let's take 10% of our direct deposit, let's put it in a separate account that we can't touch, can't move any money until it's 3 to 5 business days later, and let's store something up, because a rainy day, or actually in this case a lack thereof, is about to come. So let's take some pieces of what we have now and store it up for later. We would call this budgeting in our households. You take whatever percent of your paychecks, you direct it towards 401k, you direct it towards, health insurance and all of these other things. But so he's doing this on a large scale, on a scale that is countrywide. So everybody take 20% of what you have, bring it to the storehouse. And I'm not sure if they told the other people that 7 years of famine were coming. I'm sure they did not, because that would cause mass panic, and it would be no good for anybody. Again, why we search for a discerning and wise man to be over these kinds of things. So bring in your 10, your 20%, and I'm sure the Bible doesn't talk about anybody's reaction to this, but I'm sure, just having known people, being around people and working with people, that 20 or that 10% boost was enough to make people upset. It was enough to make people a little mad until famine comes. So verse 37 says, the plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all of his officials. So Pharaoh asked them, can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? So there's our last qualification. So you have to be discerning. You have to be wise, and you have to have the Spirit of God. That's what Pharaoh was looking for in order to keep Egypt afloat. Now, Pharaoh, being Egyptian, that wasn't their line of religion. They weren't. They didn't follow the same Hebrew God, but he had enough wisdom to know that if there's anyone, if God interpreted this dream, then the person who should carry out the responsibilities of overseeing and making sure that our land doesn't crumble in should have that same Spirit of God. They should know that same God that interpreted this dream. So then, in verse 39, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. So, in the course of 39 verses, Joseph has gone from a prisoner to the second highest ranked man in Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. Now, from the outside looking in, that would look like Joseph had just, sprung up. He became an overnight celebrity. He gained all of this wealth and this status out of nowhere. And, these are the kind of people that we would be jealous about. These are the kind of people that we would sit and say, okay, well, Lord, I've been working for this long. Why haven't I gotten anywhere? These are the kinds of people that would be like, okay, God, I see what you're doing for them. What are you going to do for me? Fact of the matter is, if we didn't know, if we just saw Joseph face to face, we wouldn't know that there were 12 years in prison that he was caught up in. We wouldn't know that he was sold by his own flesh and blood into slavery for 8 ounces of silver. We wouldn't know that. We would just look at the final product, say, okay, God, well, do it for me. Do it for me now, Lord. Please, 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 please. God, I'm crossing my fingers and I'm begging and I'm pleading. But sometimes we're not ready for the sacrifice that the calling has, that the calling comes with. We want to be in the palace. We want to be second to Pharaoh. We want to be second in command, first in command, and all of these great things. But we're not ready for the sacrifice. We're not ready for those still moments where God has to work on our character. We're not ready for those still moments where God has to put us through things to iron us out. We're not ready for that. So moving on in the text here, we see that Joseph becomes in charge of Egypt. So looking at verse 41, it says, so Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and people shouted before him, make way. Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then in verse 44 it says, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, but without your word no one will lift hand or foot in all of Egypt. Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Sephnath-Paneah and gave him Asenath, daughter of Potipharah, priest of On, to be his wife. And Joseph went throughout the land of Egypt. So Joseph had gotten everything, he'd gotten everything that was taken from him. He got his nice coat back. He's about to start a family, as we're about to see in a couple of verses, and all of these good things. So everything the song says, and forgive me, Pastor, for quoting songs. The song says, everything that the devil stole, God's given it back to me. So he lost some things on the way, but we're seeing that God's restoring things. And we're seeing that God is restoring them in a way that goes above and beyond what Joseph could have possibly dreamed about when he was in the field. So then, verse 46 says, Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced plentifully. So we see that Joseph was right. We see that God really gave Joseph this vision. And then in verse 48, it says, Joseph collected all the food produced in those 7 years of abundance in Egypt and stored it in the cities. In each city, he put the food grown in the fields surrounding it. So, for instance, in Cleveland, we would have a storehouse. In Bedford, there would be a storehouse. In Garfield, there would be a storehouse. In Euclid, there would be a storehouse. In East Cleveland, there would be a storehouse. And then, stretching out because this was a wide expanse of land. So in Columbus, there would be a storehouse. In Dayton, there would be a storehouse. In Cincinnati. So each place had its own storehouse. So if and when that famine came, they could distribute. It would be easier to distribute those goods. So then it says, Joseph stored up huge quantities of grain, like the sand over the sea. It was so much that he stopped keeping records because it was beyond measure. So grain was the key thing that was stored, because grain could be stored and held for longer periods of time than any fruit or vegetable. Or can you imagine, like, just keeping pumpkins in a silo for 7 years like that? You know how bad that would smell? That would be terrible. Like, no, we don't do that. Can you imagine storing meat up in in a silo for 7 years like that? So, and grain at the time was the basis for a lot of the Egyptian diet and for the land surrounding. So then we see in verse 50, before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asnath, daughter of Potiphar, a priest of On. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh and said, "It is because God has made me forget all my troubles and all my father's household." Then the second son he named Ephraim and said, "It is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." So Manasseh, so it says that God has made me forget. So God called Joseph out of the bitterness that could have taken him under. You know, God called Joseph out of I'm sure what could have turned into hatred in his heart for his family. You know, things that could have hindered him from this process of being great. God called him out of that. God calls him to forget. Forget that. Forget that you were sold by your brothers. Forget that you were wrongly accused of sexual harassment by Potiphar's wife. Forget all that. Forget all that. Look what I've done for you instead. So Joseph named that first son Manasseh. One thing that Joseph did not forget, however, is the God of his father and his father's father and father's father's father. So he still had these things ingrained in him. The Bible says, train up a child in the way he should go and he will not depart from it. That sort of thing is what we see manifest in Genesis, even though it wasn't written yet. All right. But he still had that kind of thing ingrained in his heart. You know, hide the word within my heart so that I may not sin against God. That sort of thing. We see that Joseph had a good, solid upbringing. He knew God. He knew to rely on God. He knew to call on God when needed. But when he went into these tumultuous situations, when he went into these different, you know, this path that was chosen for him by other people, you know, it could have turned his heart cold. And honestly, if we're honest, if we were in the same situation, you know, we've turned cold for less. I've turned cold for less. Listen, my sister used to pick, my siblings used to pick on me so bad, y'all. So when I was younger, I had asthma, really bad asthma. It wasn't funny at all. One Christmas, we used to wrap each other's Christmas gifts. Santa was never a thing in our household, and it's fine, whatever, we'll move on. So we used to wrap each other's Christmas gifts. So they tricked me. I was the youngest of four, and I was just bright-eyed and just ready to face the world. Always had a smart mouth. God, y'all pray for me. So we used to wrap each other's Christmas gifts. So one year they tricked me. They said, hey, if you tell us what we got for Christmas, we'll tell you what you got for Christmas. So I said, all right, well, there was a Barbie Rapunzel house that I wanted so bad, and I was just hoping that they would tell me that they wrapped it for me. And so I told them, I said, well, Sonny, this is what you got. Ryan, this is what you got. Phil, this is what you got, and this is what Gran got y'all, and this is what Mom got y'all, and yada, yada, yada. And I said, okay, so what'd I get? And they just kind of looked at me. And then my brother looks at me, and he goes, well, we got you an inhaler for Christmas, and left it at that and walked away. Y'all, when I tell y'all I was mad for years about that, when I tell y'all I was mad for years about that, they hadn't put me in prison, they hadn't sold me off to slavery, but that was enough. That was enough to do for me at the time. So I say that to say, we get so upset and so hurt over the smallest things, when God is telling us that, listen, you've been through these hard times. You've been through these troubling situations. Your family's a wreck. Your family's annoying. But let me call you out of that. Let me call you away from that bitterness that's in your heart. Let me put you in position so that you can grow. Let me put you in a place, because you have the gifts. You have the talents. You have everything. I've equipped you with everything that you need. But now we've got to shape your character. Now we've got to get you polished off. Now we've got to make you shiny and new. Now we've got to do something else, because you have everything, but without knowing how to use everything, you're going nowhere. So we see that God, so Joseph named his son Manasseh, meaning that God caused him to forget. And then at the end of chapter 41, it says the 7 years of abundance. Oh, and then with Ephraim, sorry. So not only did God cause Joseph to forget, he blessed him with the first son, and God blessed him with another son. So not only has God caused me to forget all of the bitterness in my heart, God made him fruitful. God gave him a gift. Sons were gifts from God. They were believed to be, the blessing of the family. So God gave him two. He said, okay, listen, here's the first one, you have your heir, but here's another, just to round out your household. Okay, so back to the text, verse 53, it says, the 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end. As Joseph said it would, and the 7 years of famine began just as Joseph had said. There was famine in all the other lands, but in the whole land of Egypt there was food. When all Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried out to Pharaoh for food. Then Pharaoh told all the Egyptians, go to Joseph and do what he tells you. When the famine had spread over the whole country, and some texts say the whole world, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout Egypt. And all the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe everywhere. So we see Joseph was released from, Pharaoh had a dream. The cupbearer said, okay, listen, I may have forgot something. There's a man in the prisons. He can help you. He brought Joseph up. Joseph's life changed in an instant because of the mercy and favor of God, because his name was in the right place at the right time, and God had been working on him, and he got released from prison, and things just started to climb and go up and up and up. And Joseph was a wise, and he had the Spirit of God on him, and he was able to use his discernment and was able to basically save the land. He saved all of Egypt and the surrounding areas. Here is where the drama starts. Chapter 42, at the beginning of chapter 42, we go back to Canaan, back to where Joseph's father and his brothers are. His mother has since passed. She did give birth to another son, Benjamin, who Jacob loved just as much as he loved Joseph. Now, the other brothers, just from reading the text, we see that, listen, Jacob's not their biggest fans. But let's go ahead and dive in here. What time is it? Okay. All right, so we'll go ahead and dive in. So verse 1 of chapter 42 says, when Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, why do you just keep looking at each other? He continued, I have heard there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us so that we may live and not die. The God's Word translation says, go down there and buy some for us so that we don't starve to death. So what caught my eye when I first started this is that opening line when Jacob says, why do you just keep looking at each other? And that was my question too. Like, why would they be looking at each other? 20 years had gone by. 20 years had gone by since Joseph had been sold into slavery. And just the mere mention of Egypt caused the brothers to look at each other like, so y'all gonna tell him? Or, because we can't go back to Egypt because chances are our brother's still a slave there. So why are y'all looking at each other like that? It doesn't explicitly say that Jacob knew that the brothers did something to Joseph. I personally believe that parents have another instinct, that there's always that feeling that something's not right, especially when they just brought the jacket home with the lamb's blood on it and there was like nothing, you didn't bring anything else of my son back. So he says, go on down there, get the food so we can live, please. So then the next verse 3 says, then 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with the others, because he was afraid that harm might come to him. And why would he be afraid of that? Last time he sent these brothers out, and one of them didn't come back. So that I would be afraid too. And Benjamin and Joseph were the two sons from Rachel. If you remember the start of Jacob and Rachel, he worked 14 years for this woman, and the two sons were all that he had to show for it after she passed. He already lost one of them. I'm not going to put my second one in danger like that. So it says, so Israel's sons were among those who went to buy grain, for there was famine in the land of Canaan also. Verse 8 says, now Joseph was governor of the land, the person who sold grain to all its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down upon him with their faces to the ground. So y'all remember the dream. Joseph told them, listen, hey, y'all are going to bow down to me one day. And I'm sure he said it more like pesky at the time. Like, I don't think he ever imagined that this would be the circumstance that they had to bow down in. But either way, the brothers had to bow down. So then it says, as soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. And then he asked them, where do you come from? And then they replied, from the land of Canaan to buy food. And although, verse 8 says, although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Then he remembered his dreams about them and said to them, you are spies. You have come to see where our land is unprotected. So Joseph has done all of this growing and all of this wonderful, polishing and becoming the man that he is in Egypt right before this. And just imagine you've done all of this growth. You've really worked on yourself. You've really come to terms with who you are in Christ. And here comes the person or the people that put you in an unfortunate or sticky situation. So I've worked, he was enslaved rather for 12 years. He was in prison for 12 years. He was enslaved. And here comes his brothers asking for food. Again, a lot of us have had colder hearts for a lot less. So here they come, and then we see, so he says, "Are you spies?" Now Joseph knew they weren't spies. That probably wasn't something that he really thought at all. But he took it as an opportunity to kind of get back at them. This is kind of something you have to think he hadn't seen his brothers since he was being carted off. So this is his initial reaction. There's still some ill will there 20 years later, and I'm not going to lie, 20 years later I probably would be a little salty too. So I understand where Joseph's coming from with this one. So it says, so after he asked if they were spies, in verse 10 it says, "No, my lord," they answered, "your servants have come to buy food. We are all the sons of one man. Your servants are honest men, not spies." How are you going to tell me that you are an honest man after y'all sold me for 8 ounces of silver? So he says, "No, my lord," so we're honest men. So Joseph says, "No, you have come to see where our land is unprotected." And then verse 13 says, "But they replied, your servants were 12 brothers, the sons of one man who lives in the land of Canaan. The youngest now is with our father, and one is no more." So y'all are so honest, but you're still holding up this story that Joseph had died, and you're telling this to the man that y'all thought that y'all left to perish. So then verse 14 says, "Joseph said to them, 'It is just as I told you. You are spies, and this is how you will be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of your number to get your brothers. The rest of you will be kept in prison, so that your words may be tested to see if you are telling the truth. If you are not, then as surely as Pharaoh lives, you are spies.' And he put them all in custody for 3 days." So the original plan that Joseph came up with, I'm going to keep, so Benjamin was still at the house. Joseph was there. I'm going to keep 9 of y'all in this prison. One of you can go back and get the other brother, and then you come back here, and then I will give you everything that you need. So then it says, on the 3rd day, Joseph said to them, "Do this, and you will live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers stay here in prison, while the rest of you go and take grain back for your starving households. But you must bring your youngest brother to me, so that your words may be verified and that you may not die." This they proceeded to do. So plans changed. Instead of 9 of you staying here and 1 of you going, 1 of you will stay here and 9 of you will go. Either way, though, we need your youngest brother here. I want to see him in the flesh. If you don't bring him back here, you won't be getting anything. He does end up sending them with grain and everything. So in verse 21, they said to one another, "Surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come on us." Now, logically, the famine's in the whole land. It's not something, that's just settled on one family. So what we see here is a guilty conscience of the rest of the brothers that had a part. So they're starting to feel guilty, so much so, and this is how we handle guilt. Everything that we've ever done wrong, we just assume, okay, well, this is God paying us back for that time that we did this. This is God just paying us back for the time that we did that. This is just God paying us back. And we try to bear that on our shoulders, but a lot of times, or sometimes, or whatever the case may be, it's not necessarily that. Sometimes there are things that have to happen in order to progress you further. And this is one of those cases. This wasn't a situation of, okay, well, God's paying us back for selling our brother. This is a situation where God is putting us in a hard place so that we know how to fight for our survival. So then Reuben says, because there's always one in the crowd, Reuben replied, "Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy?" There's always one. There's always that "I told you so" person in your group of friends or in your family or wherever the case may be. Didn't I tell you not to sin against him? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood. And verse 23 says, they did not realize that Joseph could understand him since he was using an interpreter. I kind of like Joseph for this. And it's a little sneaky, but I definitely understand. So Joseph, in order to keep up his appearance that he wasn't one of them, brought in an interpreter. So say, for instance, I have my family speaks Swahili. And in this land, we typically speak English. So instead of just, acting like I can understand the Swahili that they're speaking to me, I'm using a translator. Because, why would I tell them now, if I'm trying to keep up this ruse that I'm not one of you, why would I speak directly to you? There's only going to be a handful of people that may have wandered into Egypt, knew Hebrew, and had been elevated. And I'm sure, physically, if he would have spoken with them in their native tongue, they would have put two and two together. They would have figured that out. So then verse 24 says, he turned away from them and began to weep. So we see that Joseph he's feeling lots of feelings. There are lots of things that are going on. So he turned away and began to weep, but then came back and spoke to them again. He had Simeon taken from them and bound before their eyes. So Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, to put each man's silver back in his sack, and to give them provisions for their journey. So not only did they come in and get grain, they've got their money back, and they got provisions, for their journey. And we see in the next couple of verses here that gratitude wasn't their first emotion. So we see, I'm sorry, y'all, this text is so small. So he fills the bags with grain. After this was done for them, they loaded their grain on their donkeys, and they left. Then verse 27 says, at the place where they stopped for the night, one of them opened his sack to get feed for his donkey, and he saw silver in the mouth of his sack. And so in verse 28 it says, my silver has been returned, he said to his brothers. Here it is in my sack. Their hearts sank, and they turned to each other trembling and said, what is this that God has done for us? Instead of saying, wow, look at this, God has given us our money back. Because of that guilt, it turned to God. What are you about to do to us? They assumed that instead of it being a blessing, that they were going to end up in the bottom of a prison for theft. They assumed that, maybe instead of really thinking about it, maybe really examining their surroundings, that what was going on, it wasn't a provision from God. It couldn't have been. We left Egypt. This is godless land. We came back with all of this extra stuff. There's no way that this could be God-given. So then, verse 29 says, when they came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had happened to them. They said, the man who is Lord over the land spoke harshly to us and treated us as though we were spying on the land. But we said to him, we are honest men. We are not spies. We were 12 brothers, sons of one father. One is no more, and the youngest is now with our father in Canaan. Then the man who is Lord over the land said to us, this is how I will know whether you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers here with me, and take food for your starving households and go. But bring your youngest brother to me, so I will know that you are not spies, but honest men. Then I will give your brother back to you, and you can take a trade in the land. So this is what they're telling. This is what they're telling Jacob. Now, mind you, Benjamin is the son that Jacob has left that he truly loves. This is the last piece of Rachel that he has left. So verse 35 says, as they were emptying their sacks, there in each man's sacks was his pouch of silver. When they and their father saw the money pouches, they were frightened. Again, this sounds like they're going to end up in the bottom of a prison. Then it says in verse 36, their father Jacob said to them, you have deprived me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more. And now you want to take Benjamin? Everything is against me. So you left one time, you lost one son. You left a second time, and you lost another one? Where can y'all be going? Where can you be losing all of these people? Like, what are y'all doing? Why every time I let y'all out of the house, you come back with one less person? And I mean, I'm sure that is very disheartening. And for Jacob, having been a devout father, having been a devout husband, having been a devout Israelite, or being Israel himself, I'm sure, I mean, that has to be heart-wrenching. So not only you lost the one, or the one was killed by the wild animals, allegedly. The other one's in an Egyptian prison. Now you want me to send my last son with y'all? And here's Jacob's response. All right, he says, then Reuben said to his father, you may put both of my sons to death if I do not bring him back to you. Entrust him to my care, and I will bring him back. Reuben is the oldest, so you know that means a lot, especially by way of heirs. Verse 38 says, but Jacob said, my son will not go down there with you. His brother is dead, and he is the only one left. If harm comes to him on the journey you are taking, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in sorrow. That closes out chapter 42. And of course, next week we will go into, what happens next and all of that. We ended right at the peak of the story. If this were a regular sitcom or a regular TV drama, it would say to be continued and have all the good dramatic music. But next week, we will see, what happens when everybody returns back to Egypt and, all of that good stuff. From here, though, there are two key takeaways. So God moves in his own time. And in that timing, it doesn't match up with what we would choose for ourselves. And ultimately, that's because God sees a bigger picture than we do. We are only, wise enough or smart enough to look within our immediate circumstances. But God sees bigger things. God sees that, like I said, you're gifted, you're talented, but God sees that there are some character things that don't fit in there. And those are things that, we look over because in our minds, we are great. In our minds, we have it all together. In our minds, we know everything and all of that good stuff. Fact of the matter is there are things that God is still working with each of us on. So trust that process. And it reminds me of the verse that says, all things work together for the good of those that love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. Joseph is a very, very good example of that. Because if he hadn't ended up in one place, which led to the other, like little dominoes falling down, he wouldn't have been able to save Egypt. And then the second thing is, just be careful. Ask God to let you forget some of the things that have happened to you, so that as you go about your walk, so as you encounter the very same people who hurt you, you are able to heal and grow from that, and you are able to walk in the purpose that God has for you. Even if you come face to face with those people, it's my prayer that God softens your heart. It is my prayer that you are able to walk with your head held high. It is my prayer that God will keep you and keep your mind in those times. Before we close out, do we have any questions, comments, concerns? We have mics on the back. Podium.
I wrote down a few notes. Guilty.
Guilty.
The brothers,
guilty,
over all those years, didn't, shared, was sitting at the table, didn't tell their father what happened. So, they were guilty, and, they had to keep up alive for all those years.
20 years.
20 years of
to just be lying.
Just lying. And then when it came down to the point, they felt that, okay, God is punishing them for something. So that's one. Then the second one is, I always hear that expression, I don't look what I've been through, what I've been through. So Joseph sold into slavery, 12 years of prison. Now he's second in command. And his brothers didn't even recognize who he was. He had been through all that. And so that's what I got out of it.
I love that. All right. Any other questions, comments, concerns, thoughts? Yes, sir. In the balcony.
In the cheap seats.
In the residing area.
It was just a note I wrote down, and it really had to do with that, with the last verse, verse 38, where he said, my son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he's the only one left. Now it's 12 of them. It's 12 of them, actually. So, but he really loved Rachel because he's like, since Joseph and Benjamin were the two sons of Rachel, and he's like that.
Your mic is cutting all the way out.
So he's basically saying that, that's just the only one left, but it's the only one left of Rachel's bloodline, that he loved so much. So it was just something I was thinking about.
That is, and you can go back in your spare time and go back over that story with Jacob and Rachel. Jacob worked really hard for Rachel. So we're talking like 14 years of servitude for one person, just to have these other children go and lose one of the key pieces of their relationship, and then come back and say, okay, well, we know we lost Joseph, but we need the other one too. If you want to survive, we're gonna have to take this one too. I can't imagine. Not even like, I'm not even a parent yet, but I can't even fathom. I can't fathom that. Yeah. All right, y'all. Well, thank you so much for coming in.
No, you don't get out that easy.
Oh, caught me.
I'm sorry. Somebody raised in the chat about thank God there's always a plan. And so can you talk about how we have to really ask God for discernment, patience, and perseverance as we yield to His plan over our plan. So that's one thing to speak about. And then the second question is managing, and I heard you just say this a few seconds ago, and this popped in my head, being able to manage pain and loss with individuals. Sometimes we can be so insensitive and so irrational. So can you speak a little bit to that and how this text kind of lifts that up?
Okay. So the first one about having a plan. So God always has the plan. The key to having access to, or to kind of, getting a little bit of insight as to what that is, that's all done in, via relationship. So it's all about being in communion with God, really seeking God's face about things, and not necessarily just when you find yourself in the bottom of a prison. On your way from the prison, on your way to the palace, ask God, what is it that you would have me share? What is it that you would have me do? How can I incorporate you, God, into my plans? When you're planning, and in Habakkuk, it tells us to write the vision and make it plain. That planning process, that writing process, all of that has to include prayer. It has to include communication with God. or else you are working towards nothing. You are working and building a house on a foundation that will not stand. It will, for lack of a better term, you will be wasting your own time. But when you do have that relationship with God, when you are able to hear God's voice, when you are able to discern the voice of God from the voice of, the other people that inhabit this earth with us, that's when you start to see that things come together. In the verse that I actually just said, there are two conditions. So all things come together for the good of those who love the Lord, who are in relationship with the Lord, and for those who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. God has a purpose for you. And while we get to plan and do these things to an extent, God has already mapped your steps out. He already knew where you were going before you were even formed in the womb. God knew that. So the key is, after you know that God knows that, you have to enter into relationship. And relationship requires communication, which can be found in both prayer, fasting, and in the Word of God. And then the Bible, these two chapters do talk about loss. Particularly, Jacob is who we would naturally just assumed has lost the most, because he did presume that his son was dead. But Joseph lost a lot too. And with that loss on both ends, we see two very separate characters. Jacob, and as great as a man as he is, and as great of a foundation of the faith as he is, Jacob says, Jacob loses, and he says, why is everything against me? Joseph lost too, and Joseph took that and said, okay, well, God, help me to forget the feelings. Help me to forget some of the things that I have lost so that I can focus and I can remain great in you. So, and we all have a choice. We can choose which one of those to go with. Ultimately, we will end up, God, why is this happening to me? And that's natural. It's natural to see, well, God, why? But sometimes we do have to just step back and say, you know what, Lord, not my will, but your will be done. Because ultimately, that's what it comes down to. It's not my will. There are things that I want that don't line up to the will of God, and those things, we have to do away with. Not my will, but your will be done, God. So in loss, in experiencing loss, you have the option, to seek God's face about the plan and the purpose, and even cast your sorrows on him, cast your cares upon him, because he cares for you. Or you can sit and you can wallow. And you can, God, why me yourself till you're blue in the face. But I would suggest that you really, really choose the other route. Don't just sit and wallow. Seek God's face, seek God's purpose, seek God's will for your life, and the rest of it will come together. Just take comfort in the fact that God knows all, God sees all, and God provides, and he cares, and he's a secret hiding place that you can rest in. All right, any other thoughts or concerns? I'm trying to check the...
No, she answered that.
Okay. All right, y'all. Well, let's go ahead and pray out then. Of course, thank you all so much for joining in, for coming in the building and joining in live. Like I said, next week we'll be tackling chapters 43 and 44. Minister Lachelle Dixon Harris will do an amazing and phenomenal job. I'm so excited for that. So let's all prepare and bow our heads in prayer. God, we thank you for this time together to fellowship and to study your word. God, we thank you for, showing us pearls of wisdom and things that we can take and we can apply to our daily lives and our daily walk, God. God, as we bow our heads in prayer, oh Lord, we ask that you continue to touch us individually and collectively, God. God, for all of the hearts that are broken, or for all of the hearts that have felt neglected and let down and abandoned, God, we ask that you come in and you wrap your arms there and let us know that you are an ever constant friend, God. God, for the hearts that are grieving from loss, God, we ask that you come in and you be that shoulder to cry on, God. We ask that you be the balm to our weary hearts, oh God. God, as we continue to go on, as we continue to press our way, as we continue to seek your face throughout our daily lives, continue to be with us, continue to walk with us, continue to polish us in the places that were a little dull, continue to round out the places where we're a little bit sharp, oh God. God, continue to bless and keep us. As we leave this place, but never your presence, God, we ask a special blessing on those of us who have to travel. We ask that you give us traveling mercies to and fro. God, we know that there are a couple of families in our congregation who are going their separate ways throughout the rest of this week, God. We ask that you continue to bless them as well. Keep your hand upon them. Keep your comfort upon them. Provide them a peace that surpasses all understanding. It's in the name of Jesus that we pray. Amen.